Priya, welcome to the podcast of Let's Figure It Out. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule and joining us today. To start with the podcast, could you give our listeners a quick, sort of like a brief intro about yourself, and would love to know a quick headline of what you do today?
Yes. Yeah. So my name is Priya Sam. I'm a story architect and a strategic communication coach. And what I really do is help people to find their most powerful stories. And then I show them how to communicate them so they can stand out in the professional world.
Wow, that's an amazing intro. And story architect, that's the first time I'm hearing this word. And now I'm more curious to know, and we'll definitely figure it out in this episode. Perfect. So let's go a little bit back in your professional journey to start with. And if you can talk us and take us back, how did you started your like overall professional journey, and what was your first job? And like it was in TV, I know, but can you tell us more about how did you begin your career with TV as a news anchor, and how did you land up where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always had a passion for storytelling and I always loved like communicating, relationship building, meeting people. My parents were new immigrants to Canada when I was young. And so they immigrated from India. So they were always like listening to the news. You know, we had the radio was always on because that was how they were learning about this new culture. It's how they were learning slang. They were learning about politics, everything. So it's really like, it was a natural fit for me to go into journalism because I was surrounded by media my whole life. My first job was a newsroom assistant. I worked behind the scenes. My main job was actually to roll the teleprompter during the live newscast. So I would be in the control room and then controlling the words like the news anchors were reading on the screen. And it was very stressful, I have to say. But that job was such a perfect introduction to the industry because not only did I work those shifts, but on my days off, I would come in and shadow some of the reporters so that I could learn what that looked like. I could learn how they got interviews, how they conducted them, how they met their deadlines. And through doing that, I started putting together my own versions of their stories and sending them to the producers, just doing anything to really get noticed. And then some of the producers would give me feedback, help me to get better. And then eventually, there was this week in the summer when, like, lucky for me, one of the reporters was off and there was absolutely no one else to fill in. So they gave me a chance, and I took that. I knew it was sink or swim. I really crushed that first week, and that led to my first days being a reporter on TV. I got my first full-time job as a news anchor and morning show host on it was a smaller local show. But yeah, then I ended up like pivoting from that career to a career in tech. And then I pivoted to what I do now. So it's been a really interesting path, but the common thread is definitely that passion for storytelling and a passion for elevating the voices of underrepresented groups.
Wow. That's so fascinating to learn that how one thing led to another, and you got a chance to sort of like run the show, and then you got one more opportunity to be present in front of the TV rather than on the background. So that's really amazing. Could you tell me one skill that you learned during your time as a TV reporter?
Yeah, it's so interesting because obviously what you see on air as a viewer is like such a small snapshot of what happens. What goes into making that 2-minute story is just hours and hours of work. And I would say one of the things I learned, a skill that use all the time today, is how to build trust and rapport with someone. Because the reality is, as a news reporter, I was talking to people on the best days of their lives and also on the worst days of their lives. And so you have to be able to build trust fast. I was talking to a politician one day, a CEO the next day, somebody who was the victim of a crime the next day. And the best way to build trust and rapport is through stories. So it's sharing your own story and then creating this space for other people to share theirs. And that's a skill I used so much in the corporate world. I was a solutions consultant, which I know you know all about. But for anyone listening who maybe doesn't, I was a product expert that worked with the sales team. And so a big part of my job was building trust with customers and potential customers. And same thing, I found anytime I had an opportunity to share my story or to give someone I was meeting an opportunity to share there, it was the best way to build that trust and rapport that lays the foundation for any good relationship, working personal or professional.
Amazing. And again, a quick shout out to David Chen for connecting us because he's the best and he helped me to sort of like connect with you and sort of like to learn more about your story. So shout out to David. But yeah, coming back to our conversation. So you just mentioned storytelling is the biggest sort of like a factor in your whole journey. What you did as a first gig versus what you're doing right now, everything is connected to that. I know being in a solutions role, it's a huge sort of like tool you have and you need to have when you're interacting with customers to tell your story. How did you take that to your next step when you say you went into tech? So could you tell me more about like your time at Hootsuite and to Slack and Salesforce? How did it land up and what are some other skills you got from working in the solution industry?
Yeah, when I really saw the value of storytelling was actually when I was making that pivot and having to do job interviews for a job in a completely different field. And I never worked in tech before. And actually, for my first interview, I was up against an internal candidate. And so I knew that there was no way I could compete with that person when it came to institutional knowledge and tech knowledge, right? I had none. So, what that did is it forced me to lean even further into what really set me apart, which the way I was really pitching myself was as somebody who had excellent, like exceptional presentation skills, someone who was a great storyteller, somebody who could remain calm under pressure and already had that executive presence to be in front of people who were in the C suite or to be speaking at a conference or an event. Leaning leaning into that and really almost like branding myself as that person in through that interview process was such a game changer. It landed me that job, right? So like I think that is such a great example of the power of story and the power of having clarity on what your biggest differentiators are and then being able to articulate them. So then once I got the job, I had a lot to learn on the tech side of things. I had to build that trust and rapport with my colleagues, especially because I needed a lot of support. I didn't know, like, how many acronyms there are in tech. Like, honestly, I think I still have this notebook from my first day of training and all the words I didn't know. And it was like API, UTM, all the things that I'd never heard of before that I had to frantically Google when I got home. So I think like that relationship building aspect was so important for me. But then once I learned like the tech piece of the equation and I started presenting, that came fast. So I remember my boss saying to me, it might have taken you a bit longer on the first half of things, like, but he's like, your move here was like a hockey stick, it was like slow on the uptake, but then he's like, we got you in front of customers so fast, and that part was easy. So I think also knowing that for me, I had to continuously remind myself it's okay that you're not having the same experience as everyone else. Cause I was training with other people who had worked in tech for years. So they were learning the product really quickly. But then when it came to the customer presentations, they were asking me for ideas and help and storytelling support. So that's something I always try to encourage people is like sometimes we get so caught up in what we don't have, and what we're missing and what we need to work on that we forget about selling and focusing on the parts that we really do excel at. So that's something I really love to work with people on now is to really helping them to identify those things because it served me so well. So that skill of self-advocacy also definitely was a game changer for me because I was at Hootsuite for a year and a half and I was very, very happy there. Like no, I wasn't looking to leave, but then I got a message from a recruiter at Slack and I just thought, you know what, I've only ever interviewed for one tech job. Let me just go through this interview process. And so again, now I'm like telling new stories, but using the same frameworks I used before, leaning even further into this like excellent presentation storytelling skills. And And then I got that offer too. So that's when I really was like, there's a pattern here of using stories to advocate for myself, to show my strengths and to set myself apart as a candidate in interview processes. And I continued to kind of lean further into that, and that's how I ended up doing the work I do now. But it all started with doing free workshops when I was at Slack and Salesforce, and kind of trying out some of the frameworks and ideas that I had to see how they landed with other people. And they, spoiler alert, they landed well.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. Before we dive into the full fact of unleash the power, one question. You just mentioned that when you swivel the whole career from tech to sorry, media to tech, and you were seeing people around you who were like already experienced, and then you joined the company, you were onboarding, and then you saw that I still need to learn the product. Was there any moment, Priya, where you felt like, did I make the right decision? What was your mindset at that time?
Yeah. Um, I remember when I was like signing my contract, I I was pretty unhappy towards the end of my time in TV. So, but I didn't know, like I didn't 100% know it was the right decision. I would say, and then going through the training, I was very overwhelmed. I don't think I had a moment be like the best thing about that transition is the management and the managers I was working with, and even the colleagues, like everyone was so kind and supportive that even though I did feel overwhelmed and I knew I had a lot to learn, I felt so supported. And that was something I really hadn't felt throughout most of my time in TV. So I think that really, the fact that I felt so valued and appreciated made me feel like I was where I was supposed to be, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But there definitely was some imposter syndrome, and I will say it wasn't easy. Like the technical side of things wasn't easy in the beginning.
Absolutely. I can definitely agree on that part because coming from a manufacturing pre-sales role to a tech role and then, excuse me, learning all those acronyms, just like what you mentioned, was kind of a challenge for me. But now when you look back, you saw that you had tools to support you as well as the right people who were helping you out to achieve success. So I definitely agree with that part. So all right, so let's roll down into your the biggest thing what you're doing right now, which is the power of storytelling, and you do it with unleash your voice. So tell me more. How did this all started? And you mentioned that it started from one of the sessions you were doing for Slack, and that's how you were started working on the background. Tell me more about how did this all begin and how is going so far.
Yeah, I always had an interest in entrepreneurship, and I tried a few different things. Like I have a podcast as well. So for I was trying to like monetize that for a little while. And then I was working with keynote speakers on their keynotes because I also do some speaking. But nothing kind of felt like this is like the thing that I could do all day, every day. And then I was at an event. So I got moved on to a new team when I was at Slack. I, you know, they flew all of us to New York. We were a distributed team, and we had this opportunity to meet all of our leaders and executives and do some training. And I knew that this could be the only time I see some of these people this year for sure, like potentially in the next 6 months. So I really need to make an impression, and I need to be clear about what my goals are. So I kind of crafted this whole story and this whole strategy. So my plan was, as I met leaders and executives, to say to them, oh, like, how did you end up working in tech, or how did you end up here at Slack? Create space for their stories. And then I knew that they would ask me in return, oh, like, what about you? So this is a great strategy actually for anyone listening to use. Like, ask the questions you want to answer when you are networking, and then have your story ready. So when they would ask me, then I would say, oh, actually, like, I ended up here in like kind of an interesting way because I used to be a TV news anchor and morning show host. And then of course they're like, whoa, like really? That's interesting. So then I'm like, yeah. So, I, the reason that I left is because I was unhappy. I wasn't working in great work environments. I didn't have good managers. And I really wanted to find a new way to use my storytelling skills. And that's what led me to the solutions consultant role. And the past few years, I've really been focused on that technical aspect. But this year, what I really want to do is bring my TV experience and my tech experience together and do more speaking at conferences and events on behalf of the company. So if you hear of any opportunities, like I would love to be considered. So I'm doing this, like telling the story over and over again, like making these connections with executives. And then I start to look at what are my colleagues doing. And I saw so many people just like so uncomfortable, shrinking back. Like executives would ask them, like, well, tell me about yourself, or like, how did you end up here? Whatever, all these things. And they weren't taking the opportunity to share their stories. And I just had this aha moment of this is how I can help people. I can help people advocate for themselves and like learn how to use their power stories the way I use mine. So that's what led me to do my first workshop. I did it for the Slack Women's ERG, Employee Resource Group. And, it went really well. After a couple people were like, that was great. I would literally pay you to help me with this. One woman, 2 months later, she messaged me and said, I used the story I built in your free session in my promotion conversation and I got promoted. So, yeah. So that like I just felt like I was getting all of these signs that like this work can be really valuable. And I also just personally, when you feel that spark, like just something just feel you're like, "Ooh, that felt good. That felt rewarding." And I definitely had that in that first workshop. So I just kept like leaning further into that. I started working with people one-on-one on the side, and then I started a group program in the fall of 2023 called the Unleash program. And it's really just grown from there. So now I do like corporate workshops and some speaking, and then I do one-on-one work, and I also have a group program. So my one-on-one work is more with executives, and then my group program is for individual contributors and sort of like early managers.
Wow, that's so amazing, and I completely agree on that part. Like the best story you can tell is about yourself. If you can't describe yourself in a way that it's sort of like fascinating and engaging, you're not doing the right job. So, and honestly, Priya, most of our listeners are like either they're in the middle of their career or like they're starting to get into the job, doing the interviews. What kind of other tips you can give to our listeners who are like, let's say, for the interview or even for their professional journey for improvising the storytelling overall technique?
Yes. One of the biggest shifts I see in my clients is in how they start their interviews. Because the reality is, like, we all know the market is so incredibly competitive right now. You have to stand out at every opportunity. So, like, the first question you typically get in an interview is like, oh, so tell me about yourself, right? Or give us an overview of your career. And most people throw this away. They're like, they summarize their resume. Oh, I spent 5 years here, I spent 10 years here. This question is where you want to stand out right away. So, what I recommend doing is actually highlighting what sets you apart right off the bat. And a great way to frame it is, the two themes that consistently surface in my career are, and then make them really elevated and specific. So don't say like collaboration, resilience, adaptability, right? Like those things are great for entry level jobs. But when you are mid career, you need to sound more sophisticated and elevated because you are. And you want other people to see that. So things like, so maybe the first theme is that I'm passionate about building scalable processes, or that I bring clarity to chaos in customer success, like whatever that might be. Like thinking, and a great way to do this is just to look at the patterns that you see in your own key experiences and to pull out some of those themes. So then framing your story that way, with that first sentence, the two themes that surface consistently in my career are this and this. So the first time this happened, like the first time I built a scalable process was at X company. And what I did was X, and I was there for 3 years. So you're still giving your experience, but you're doing it in the form of stories. You're right. You're memorable. You're setting yourself apart and differentiating yourself right off the bat. So I would say like that's a game changer when you can really nail that answer. And then in all of your answers, looking for opportunities to tell micro stories. And those are sometimes just one or two sentence stories. But instead of just saying, like I love working on a team, I'm really collaborative. I like working on projects where, whatever you might normally say. Give that like for example, and then make sure you talk about your role. Like this is another thing I see, especially like women and people from underrepresented groups. They often use things like we or the team did this, right? So making sure that you are saying I, right? And we're not talking about lying. You need to be honest, but you might not have led the project, but what part of the project did you lead? Right? Like I led this part of the project and it led to X business outcome. So those micro stories can be really powerful in elevating your interview answers too.
Absolutely. That's so nice to, I mean, like I was thinking about while you were telling me the different factors, different parts, I was thinking in my mind that let's say now if I'm interviewing somewhere or if I'm like talking to my executives internally, if they ask me, hey, what's your experience looks like, this is how I'm gonna frame it in a way that dividing into themes rather than you just mentioned like a summary which everyone is reading from your resume. It doesn't make any difference, but if they are asking about yourself, you should be telling which can be engaging as well as kind of like into pieces and completing one story altogether.
Yes. Yeah, and with those like you mentioned just talking to executives and maybe you're in a more casual situation, like maybe you have an internal company meetup and you're at happy hour. I always think of those answers as did you ever read those choose your own adventure books?
Which one?
So they were called Choose Your Own Adventure, and you would
Okay.
read a page and it would be like if you want, so let's say it was like about going about like a trip. Be like if you want to go to the Grand Canyon, turn to page 7. If you want to go to Las Vegas, turn to page 8. So it's like this story where you could kind of choose the different paths. So when I think about how to answer tell me about yourself in a more social but still professional situation, like networking, I think of make your answer like a choose your own adventure. So you want to give the other person a few different topics that they could ask you more about and then let them choose where they want to go with you.
Nice, nice. So like put a little curiosity in that story so that
Yes.
they'll be more like, oh, what's next? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause like when I meet people, if it's a networking event, you're networking. But like I was at the gym, for example, and I was started working training with a new group of people. And we all went around and introduced ourselves. And so I was like, okay, great. Well, like my name is Priya. Professionally, I'm a story architect and a strategic communication coach. I also love to travel. I've been to 40 countries so far, and I have two cats named Kimchi and Zelda. And so one of the like in that intro, I'm like, okay, I told you what I did for work. Then I didn't just say I love to travel. I said I've been to 40 countries, right? So just that little bit of extra information that makes it more memorable. And then I didn't just say I have cats. I said their names are Kimchi and Zelda. And so what happened after is like a couple of the people there were like, what's a story architect? What tell me about your work? And then someone else was like, 40 countries, like where have you been? And then someone else is like, oh, I have cats too. Like, why did you name your cat Kimchi? And that we started talking about, how I used to live in South Korea. And so like those are the little tweaks that make a big difference and make it easy for other people to build a conversation with you too.
Yeah, I think you just gave a great example. Like even I was curious when you just said like 40 countries, or like I was about to ask like what, why, and like how, first of all, like which is your best country? Like I have questions in my mind to
Yes.
learn more about it. And that's so nice that you gave a one-liner and that gave me like 3 to 4 different questions already in one direction.
100%.
So Priya, I know you work with like lots of individuals who are like either in their early careers or executives. What is the biggest challenge like you have seen? And if you can give a little bit more tips in terms of like crafting a story is one thing, but some people are like, hey, how can I start? Or like, is there a book someone can read and try to work on it? Is there like your podcast, or is there any other thing? What are the other tools which people can use to sort of like self practice and be more efficient when they're telling the story?
Yeah. Um, this is a great topic because one of the things that a lot of us struggle with is confidence. And, you hear people say, like, yeah, I need more confidence. But it's like, well, how do you build that confidence? Right. And that's such an important place to start. And sometimes you might be really confident in one area of your life, but not in another too. Right. So you're not always struggling with your all of your confidence, but it might be just, oh, and professionally, I'm struggling. One of the exercises I really like to do with all of my clients is I get them to make a list of their biggest turning points. And I say turning point, I mean like those pivotal moments in your life that changed everything. And sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. And I put in two columns like professional and personal. And I I personally think we are not siloed people, right? Like everything, like personal, professional, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. But I think it's helpful for people to think of them separately in the beginning. What I find during that exercise is people start to realize how amazing they are, how resilient they are, how much they have accomplished, how like the twists and turns in their lives that they've navigated. Because those turning points can be everything from, losing a loved one to moving to a new city, learning a new language, getting laid off, getting a promotion, right? Like all of these moments. And when you see them written down, it's so important to like write them down because when you see them all on a page, you start to realize, wow, I've done a lot. And that's really good for your confidence. And then the next step is looking at those moments and starting to connect them to the goal that you might have in that moment. So, if you're someone, for example, who is trying to get a new job, then you need to look at those turning points and that can help you build your story. That's like I mentioned earlier, like trying to find patterns. So, that's a great place to see patterns. And it's always helpful to have someone to dig deeper with you, right? Like, I'll just give you a quick example because I had this one client and she had been an individual contributor for 6 years. And we went through this exercise. She made this whole list of her turning points. And her goal for working together was she wanted to get a leadership role. But she kept saying to me, but I don't have leadership experience. So I don't know how I'm going to do this. And so as we were going through her turning points, I was like, "Oh, what's this? You said you like trained a team in the UK." She's based in the US. She's like, "Oh yeah, I was actually, you know what? Actually, I did have some leadership experience because I was on a team of 10 people and my manager asked me to go to the UK to train the company's first European team." And I was like, "That's a huge story. Okay, that's great." So then I was asking her some deeper questions and I said, "Well, when is the first time in your life that somebody else saw you as a leader?" And she said, "Well, when I played varsity softball," also very cool in itself. But her last year, the team was really struggling. She was like, "I felt so overlooked and undervalued." And then at our awards banquet, I was so surprised when my coach called me up to receive the leadership award. And what he said is that I was somebody who led with calm consistency. And I wasn't the loudest voice, but I always set an example for my teammates. So like these two stories became the foundation of her leadership story. So now when she went into a job interview and they're like, "Okay, so you've been an individual contributor for 6 years. Why do you want to be a leader now?" She's like, "Well, actually, like I've always had leadership qualities and the first time someone else saw them in me was when I played varsity softball." Tells the story. And then I've brought those same qualities, that calm consistency, that not being the loudest voice in the room, into the workplace. And this is how I've led teams. I was asked to train the first team at my startup in Europe, right? So all of those experiences woven together created this really powerful story. And she ended up landing a director level role.
Wow.
That was just right. Yeah. Like, and that's just one of the stories we built. But this is really the power of doing that deep discovery and making those connections.
That is so nice. So you just gave another set of eyes and sort of like helped her understand the positives and the good things what she already did. And but she was overseeing it. She was not like confident enough to like, oh, whether this counts or not. And you just validate on it, like, yeah, this is something which you have already done. So it
Yes.
boosts the overall confidence. Like, and then at the end of the day, you just give yourself a pat on the back, like, yes, I've did something. I've already achieved these things. That's so nice. And I really agree on the way you describe like your ups and downs in your life. And when you map it all together, you feel like it's not all the negatives happen in your life. There are many positives, and sometimes those negatives helped you become more stronger to be enjoying those positives which came later on. I definitely agree on that mapping part. So thank you for telling that part.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's such a powerful exercise. And I agree. Like sometimes, especially those difficult moments, we get really caught up in the negative part or the hard part. But when we reflect back, we can see how we navigated that situation and like feel a lot of pride and confidence in how we handled something difficult. Yeah, it's a really good way of explaining it. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we're almost wrapping up our conversation, Priya. One last question before we wrap up. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would that be?
Take more risks. Like, there are so many times that I think I had an idea and I was like, but like, who's going to care about that? Or like, I just like talked myself out of trying new things and taking some chances. And it wasn't until, 2 or 3 years ago that I really bet on myself. And I think I would just tell my younger self, just bet on yourself. Like you are the best investment. Investing in yourself is the best investment you will ever make. And I mean, I'm glad I did it, and I am where I am now. But I think my younger self could have used some of that confidence to bet on herself too.
That is so true, because if you don't take that first step, and if you're always just thinking in a way that what would happen if I fail or if I don't reach the summit, it doesn't make any sense, because it's not the summit, it's the journey where it takes you. And if you don't take that first step, you won't be able to enjoy that journey. So definitely take risk. Just do it. I mean, who cares if you fail? I mean, it's just an experience you will gain, and maybe that will teach you something. For sure, Priya, this was amazing. I mean, I've learned so much in terms of like storytelling. So next time, I think if someone is gonna ask me about like, hey, tell me about yourself, I'm gonna give a different answer for sure. A little different than what I have on my LinkedIn and my resume, for sure. So thank you so much for teaching that, and I will definitely make sure that we have more listeners enjoying your podcast as well to learn more on storytelling. And we need more story architects in the world where everyone can tell their own story. So thank you, Priya, for doing this and sharing your professional journey with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, likewise. All right, take care.
You
Bye.
too.